Jesus? And how do our expectations, maybe the expectation that if you're a Christian, you should be happy. Maybe the expectation that if God is blessing me, that means financial blessing. You may have heard people talk like that. God is blessing me. If someone says God is blessing me, they mean that I'm financially well off right now. And so is that an expectation that we have from Jesus? Wars, refugee crises, pandemics, famines, racism, colonialism. If Jesus is king, can we expect that all of this would end now? That's also a major stumbling block for a lot of people to follow Jesus. If Jesus is king, why all of this? So we can't see. Can we see through all of these things and find Jesus? Our eyes can be constrained by our circumstances. In hopelessness, it's hard to see hope. In sadness, it's hard to find joy. In times of failure, it's hard to see success. In times of loss, it's hard to see our wins. Self, as I imagine we all do, on our own road to Emmaus, wrestling with our own expectations. Luke 24 says, Jesus is looking for you. And he will find you. And he will come and meet you where you are. Just as he came and met those disciples where they were, walking away from Jerusalem to Emmaus. So here we find Jesus meeting us where we are, or meeting the disciples where they are. The suspense is building in this story. The account reads almost like a Shakespearean comedy of errors. We're told the story from the perspective of the audience. Sometimes stories are told from the perspective of the character in the story, but we get to step back from it and watch it as the audience. So we know that the stranger is Jesus, and we know that those disciples don't know that the stranger is Jesus. And so we're watching and we're meant to wonder, are they going to figure out what we know? Are they going to figure it out? And as the suspense builds, will they see him? I remember reading this story at our supper table with our children, and I'm looking down, and I know the story, so I'm just looking down and I'm reading it. And when I came to the end, I can hear a gasp from the table. And so if you read it again for the first time, that's what happens. We're supposed to gasp when they recognize. And that's so reading the Bible with your kids can sometimes teach you what the Lord, or how we're supposed to react in those kinds of circumstances, or to those readings. And so I learned this is how I'm supposed to react. This is how I'm supposed to respond. Because when you step back and read it for the first time again, two disciples, woefully blinded, are explaining to Jesus why they think he was a failure. Awkward, right? Painful and just sad. Yet Jesus still stays with them. He keeps walking with them as they're explaining to them how disappointed they are in him. He keeps walking with them. And he's patient. He doesn't freak out. He doesn't rub it in their faces. He knows exactly what they need, and he identifies the problem, and he presents and provides the solution. And so he says to them, how slow your hearts are to believe. how slow your hearts are. Not your minds. It wasn't an intellectual problem. Actually, their hearts are the problem. Their hearts are the end of events. They already know what Jesus taught. They already know what Jesus did. They already know that he was powerful in word and deed. They already know all the relevant Bible texts too. So the solution is not to find proof texts and say, see? That's not what Jesus does. What he does is he corrects their hermeneutic. He corrects their way of reading the Bible or their way of interpreting the Bible by saying to them, by giving them this interpretive key to the whole Bible. Did not the Messiah have to suffer? Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? That's the interpretive key. The Messiah has to suffer. And then after showing them that key, he goes back to the beginning and brings them through the whole story of redemption to show them that with that key, then you will see that Jesus had to die. Then you will see that Jesus is the climax, or his death and his resurrection is the climax of a narrative that began in Genesis and ends with restoration in Revelation. So Jesus is teaching us how to read the Bible too. It's one story of redemption about him. And so as he brings them through the story, creation, fall, redemption, restoration, as he brings them through that story, they will come to see that Jesus must die for our sins and then be raised to new life, after which will come new creation and new life for everyone. So Jesus identifies their problem. He also identifies for them the real problem in the world today. The real problem is not Roman armies. The real problem is not opponents in Judea like the chief priests and the rulers. Us into our hearts. The real problem is that sin has entered this world and death with it. And that Jesus has come to deal with this problem of sin and death. To end the foreign occupation, not of Romans, to end the foreign occupation of sin and death on God's good creation so that new creation can begin. And at this moment, he needs his disciples to see that. Because only after they see that will they take up